The year was 1848. A spark ignited in the American River in California, gold was discovered. Within mere months, this discovery sent ripples across the continent, prompting hundreds of thousands to uproot their entire existences. Farmers, carpenters, and even esteemed lawyers abandoned their families and traversed vast distances, all for the feverish hope of striking it rich by digging in the mud. For most, this arduous journey ended in tragedy, yielding nothing but debilitating cholera, relentless starvation, and crushing bankruptcy. Yet, amidst this unbridled collective madness, a solitary figure emerged as the first millionaire of the gold rush era. His name was Samuel Brannan. And the truly astonishing aspect of his tale: he never personally mined a single gram of gold. Brannan was, by nature, a different kind of prospector. He didn't procure a shovel to join the diggers. Instead, with unparalleled foresight, he bought every single shovel in California before the general public even grasped the magnitude of the gold discovery. Brannan instinctively understood a profound truth: in times of widespread chaos and frantic opportunity, the real fortune rarely falls to those toiling in the trenches of the scramble. The spoils, he realized, belonged to the ones strategically positioned outside the pit, adeptly supplying the essential instruments to those consumed by the fever. Fast forward to today, 2026. As ominous clouds of conflict gather and darken the Middle East, embroiling the United States, Israel, and Iran in a volatile confrontation, we are witnessing the precise same strategic playbook unfold. While Washington rapidly depletes its vast missile arsenals and Iran desperately fights for its very survival under a cataclysmic rain of fire, a new Samuel Brannan observes intently from the sidelines. That powerful player is China. Without ever firing a single bullet, Beijing has masterfully transformed what could easily be the most dangerous conflict of the decade into arguably the biggest business deal in modern history. But precisely how is China managing to win a war it isn't even fighting? Is this an unparalleled masterclass in geopolitical strategy? Or is China, perhaps unwittingly, stepping into a perilous trap that might leave it utterly isolated when the dust of this conflict finally settles? Grab your coffee, and let's dive deep into the dramatic, almost cinematic reality of the 2026 Middle East conflict. To fully grasp the intricate Chinese strategy currently at play, we must once again cast our minds back to Samuel Brannan. He didn't unearth any new geological findings. His genius lay in a far simpler, yet more profound, insight. He merely ensured that his was the sole shop, strategically positioned on the only essential road, through which every single miner was compelled to pass. On a global scale, economists identify this specific market dynamic as a monopsony. While a monopoly signifies the presence of only one seller, a monopsony, by contrast, implies the dominance of only one buyer. Due to the relentless, crushing sanctions and the intense military pressure stemming from the 2026 operations, Iran has been stripped of the privilege of alternative options. The conventional global market has effectively slammed shut for them. International banks, paralyzed by fear of secondary sanctions, are terrified to even consider touching Iranian accounts. Similarly, major shipping companies refuse to approach their territorial waters, wary of the immense risks. This dire situation has funneled an astounding nearly 90% of Iranian oil exports to a single, willing destination, the network of small, independent refineries clustered in China's eastern Shandong province. Affectionately known as Teapot refineries, for their relatively diminutive scale compared to the gargantuan state-owned giants, these nimble players form the unexpected backbone of China's burgeoning, almost secret energy empire. Crucially, they operate without accounts in U.S. banks, rendering them largely impervious to Washington's punitive measures. For these refineries, Iranian oil isn't merely fuel, it represents an unparalleled, generational opportunity, a bargain of a lifetime. By February 2026, Iranian light crude was being sold to China at staggering discounts exceeding $12 per barrel compared to the global Brent price. When a nation is importing nearly 2 million barrels of oil every single day, that isn't just a discount, it's nothing short of a massive, strategic wealth transfer. Yet, the geopolitical game China is playing gets even deeper. China, it turns out, isn't just strategically manipulating Iran, they are simultaneously orchestrating a similar dynamic with Russia. Both nations find themselves in an increasingly precarious position, desperate for hard currency to fund their respective, costly conflicts. This shared desperation has inadvertently ignited a brutal race to the bottom for oil prices. In early 2026, Russian Urals crude was observed trading at a discount of nearly $13 per barrel. The cycle is stuck. Every time Russia lowers its price to entice Beijing, Iran is immediately forced to slash its own prices even further just to remain a relevant competitor. China, with calculated indifference, simply sits back, allowing its two supposedly closest partners to ruthlessly compete, each vying to see who can be more thoroughly exploited. Over the past few years, these substantial energy discounts alone have injected billions of dollars in savings directly into the Chinese economy. This represents the first crucial layer of China's strategic protection. While nations like Europe and Japan grapple with unprecedented, record-high energy prices stemming from the escalating Middle East instability, China, ironically, is securing its energy supplies at significantly lower cost, precisely because of the ongoing war. This influx of cheap energy is acting as a critically life-saving medicine for a very specific and insidious economic disease currently haunting Beijing: deflation. For the average consumer, the concept of falling prices might initially sound like an absolute dream come true. However, for a massive, complex economy, it is an unmitigated nightmare. When prices consistently decline, people inevitably halt their spending, perpetually deferring purchases in the expectation that goods will be even cheaper tomorrow. This stagnation directly causes factories to lose vital profit margins, which inexorably leads to widespread layoffs, subsequently resulting in even less consumer spending. It is, in essence, a crippling economic death spiral. By the close of 2025, China had already endured its longest continuous streak of deflation in over 3 decades. Yet, by strategically importing massive quantities of discounted oil from both Iran and Russia, China has remarkably managed to drastically lower production costs across almost every sector. Transportation becomes more affordable, electricity generation less expensive, and the acquisition of crucial raw materials significantly cheaper. This systemic reduction in input costs provides Chinese factories with a critical profit margin, enabling them not only to survive but to thrive, while many of their global competitors are suffocating under the relentless pressure of persistent inflation. The contrast could not be starker. In a telling example from March 2026, the formidable German chemical giant BASF announced it was compelled to raise prices by an astounding 30% across Europe, citing its inability to cope with skyrocketing energy costs. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, the Chinese government was actively absorbing the price of fuel for its populace, a direct intervention designed to ensure its vast network of factories remained operational and competitive. In essence, the protracted conflict in the Middle East is serving a dual purpose for Beijing. It is effectively weakening China's primary Western rivals, simultaneously providing the nation with the deeply subsidized energy it crucially needs to ameliorate its pressing internal economic crisis. But China's gains are not solely financial. There is a deeply strategic military dimension to this unfolding scenario, one that is proving far more terrifying for the Pentagon. Indeed, war, in its brutal reality, serves as the ultimate, unforgiving laboratory for technological advancement and tactical refinement. In 2025, the United States and Israel successfully deployed advanced electronic warfare capabilities to neutralize a range of Iranian drones and missiles. This strategy proved effective primarily because those Iranian weapon systems were heavily reliant on the American GPS signal for their guidance. Washington's response was straightforward and decisive. By simply jamming the signal, they effectively rendered the missiles blind and inoperable. But then, a pivotal and alarming shift occurred. Iran began the strategic integration of the Chinese Beidou satellite system into its evolving weaponry. Almost immediately, the accuracy and reliability of Iranian strikes improved dramatically. The Beidou system, robust and extensive, utilizes an impressive constellation of 45 satellites, significantly more than the 30 employed by GPS. More crucially, it was engineered specifically for deployment in high-interference environments. Its advanced frequency-hopping technology renders it almost impossible to effectively jam, providing a resilient navigational capability. For China, this unfolding situation is nothing short of a dream scenario. Beijing is currently acquiring invaluable real-world combat data on precisely how its sophisticated satellite system performs against the most advanced Western air defenses, all without risking a single Chinese pilot or piece of hardware. In essence, every missile Iran fires serves as a completely free, live-fire test for Beijing. On the other side of the strategic ledger, the United States is relentlessly paying the staggering bill, both in hard cash and precious military hardware. Maintaining merely one aircraft carrier strike group in the volatile waters of the Gulf, for example, incurs an operational cost exceeding $6 million per day. Furthermore, every single interceptor missile launched to defend against a comparatively low-cost drone represents an expenditure of millions, illustrating a stark and unsustainable asymmetry. However, the true cost extends far beyond mere monetary figures. It lies in the irreversible depletion of vital inventory. Strategic experts are sounding urgent alarms, warning that the US is rapidly exhausting critical stockpiles of specific long-range missiles, munitions that were initially earmarked and carefully reserved for a potential, high-stakes conflict in Taiwan. Some of these highly specialized munitions can take upwards of 20 months to manufacture, making their replenishment a painfully slow process. Consequently, with every passing day the war in the Middle East rages on, the strategic window of opportunity for a potential Chinese move on Taiwan opens just a little wider. China is observantly watching the United States exhaust its irreplaceable strategic assets in a conflict thousands of miles away from Beijing's primary geopolitical interest. And then, inevitably, there is the peace that follows the destruction. An enduring adage in international politics succinctly states that while America often wins the wars, China consistently wins the peace. Consider the recent history of Iraq. The US poured trillions of dollars and sacrificed thousands of lives to topple a regime. Yet, once the battlefield smoke cleared and the lucrative oil contracts were eventually handed out, it was overwhelmingly the Chinese state-owned companies that strategically walked away with the largest and most valuable deals. China patiently bides its time, waiting for the frenetic chaos to subside. Then, with calculated precision, they arrive, not with a rifle in hand, but with a suitcase full of cash, ready to rebuild and redefine. Case in point, in May 2025, the first direct freight train successfully arrived in Tehran from China, a momentous event marking the completion of a crucial new land corridor that entirely bypasses the traditional, often risky, sea routes. This represents a significant achievement under China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. Essentially, China is methodically constructing the foundational infrastructure of the future Middle East, even as other global powers remain preoccupied with actively destroying the infrastructure of the present. However, the role of being the world's most profitable spectator, while lucrative in the short term, often comes with a hidden and ultimately devastating cost. This brings us full circle, back to the tragic twilight of Samuel Brannan's story. Despite once being the wealthiest man in all of California, he ultimately died a pauper, stripped of everything he had accumulated. His wife abandoned him, his extensive properties were sold off to cover the cost of a bitter divorce, and he ended his days in lonely solitude within a humble boarding house. When he finally passed away in 1889, his body remained in the morgue for an entire year, unclaimed, simply because no one was willing to pay for his burial. The man who so cunningly amassed an immense fortune by profiting from everyone else's desperate struggle eventually discovered, in his final days, the bitter truth: he had cultivated no genuine friends, forged no steadfast allies, and left behind no one who felt they owed him even the slightest favor. China is, in many ways, confronting a very similar existential risk. By consciously standing back and merely observing as its strategic partner, Iran, is systematically dismantled, all while offering nothing more than lukewarm, perfunctory diplomatic statements, Beijing is unequivocally sending a stark message to the rest of the world. The implicit understanding is clear: Chinese support is fundamentally a business transaction, a cold calculation of profit and loss, rather than a bond of brotherhood or unwavering alliance. For numerous countries in the Global South, many of whom are actively seeking a credible alternative to entrenched US leadership, this becomes a deeply sobering and disillusioning realization. They observe that while the NATO alliance operates under a bedrock principle of one for all and all for one, collective security, the pragmatic Chinese model appears to advocate a starker philosophy: everyone for themselves. If a nation signs a lucrative deal with Beijing, they can expect China to build their bridges and purchase their oil, facilitating economic development. But if the missiles start flying, if genuine conflict erupts, the unstated understanding is unequivocally clear: you are entirely on your own. In the immediate short term, there is little doubt that China stands as the undisputed winner of the 2026 Middle East conflict. Beijing has successfully secured vast quantities of cheap energy, freely tested its advanced military technology in a real-world combat scenario, and watched its greatest global rival drain both its national treasury and its vital arsenals. They are, undeniably, the Samuel Brannan of the 21st century. Yet, history repeatedly warns us that the individual who chooses to stand outside the fierce fray, merely selling the shovels to those who battle, often finds himself isolated and utterly alone when the harsh winter of adversity inevitably arrives. If China persists in treating its complex global relationships as nothing more than cold, transactional line items on a ledger, it may eventually achieve the dubious distinction of becoming the richest nation in the world, yet with absolutely no one willing to stand by its side when true challenges emerge. The strategy of the silent observer is, without question, brilliant in its immediate execution, but it is also inherently fragile. As the volatile conflict in the Middle East inexorably approaches its breaking point, the entire world holds its breath, watching intently to see if China will finally choose to step up and actively protect the long-term interests it has meticulously spent decades building, or if it will persist in merely watching from the sidelines, until there is quite literally nothing left to strategically buy or leverage. The truly defining question for the future trajectory of global power isn't merely who possesses the most advanced missiles or who holds the largest reserves of gold. Rather, it is fundamentally about who has cultivated genuine allies, those willing to stand and fight alongside them even when the money runs out. In the grand, unfolding drama of cinematic history, the most enduringly successful characters are seldom the ones who choose to hide perpetually in the shadows. They are, invariably, the bold protagonists who step forward to define the era itself. And as we delve deeper into the complexities of 2026, we are on the cusp of discovering whether China will emerge as the new, visionary architect of global peace and order, or merely a remarkably lucky merchant who thrives amidst chaos. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the financial and almost cinematic history of the current war. Always remember to look beyond the headlines and focus on the deeper narratives that truly shape our world. I will see you in the next episode.